Hi everyone, welcome to session 5 of the Community-Centered Problem Solving crash course. Unfortunately, when we were doing session 5, I forgot to record until midway, but I really wanted the conversation from the first half to be a part of this video because it's pretty important. So I'm going to present and record myself and then hopefully do some edit magic to add the second half of our conversation from class. So if you missed session 5, the week before, I had assigned 2 viewings and we were going to do an unpacking of these based on community engagement principles. So the first viewing that I assigned was a documentary called Living on $1, where these American university students go to Guatemala and live there for 56 days on $1 a day to understand the experiences that people face in poverty. The second one was a TED Talk from Amanda Palmer. She's a very famous musician, on the art of asking, in which she writes and talks about how she learned to stop worrying and let people help. This is her book cover because she, after the TED Talk, also wrote a book about the art of asking. She is a performance artist and she used to be a real-life statue that would set up in parks and engage with people while dressed as a bride. And afterwards, she became a crowdfunder musician, and she talks about her experiences in the TED Talk. Both of these viewings are extremely beautiful and useful for our purposes to talk about what is the right way to engage with the community. What are some tips? What are some initial things? What are some values to keep in mind? And more importantly, I wanted people to see the way these people acted with the communities that they were engaging with, what kind of methods or what kind of activities they employed to really build a sense of community, sense of trust, establish relationships. And in both of these scenarios, we talked about the experiences that we were seeing. Before we move forward with the conversation about the readings, about the viewings, I wanted to remind everybody some of the stuff from our presentations on principles of community engagement from the previous session. This was a model that was a part of the group 2, I believe, group 2's presentation. This is a continuum of community engagement where it goes from outreach to shared leadership. I'm going to talk about what these steps are in more detail because I find this to be the most important graph in that reading. So here we're looking at levels of community engagement from outreach to shared leadership. In outreach, I like the way that this continuum describes each step in terms of what kind of communication goes on between you, the person that wants to do the engagement, and the community that you want to engage with. So the first step is outreach, where it talks about what kind of communication happens. So it says communication flows from one to the other to inform. So in outreach, basically, you send out information to the other person to inform them. You don't expect a return. There's no feedback. There's no flowing communication. You're basically saying, here's what I'm doing. An example could be Planned Parenthood giving out brochures about their services, or iZone sending out newsletters saying, hey, here's our programs for this week. We're not asking for feedback. We're not asking for any comments. We don't want any input on our programming or our services. We're simply saying, here's what we have to offer. That's basically outreach, when you are giving information about the services you're providing. You are coexisting in a space, you're not really collaborating, you're not really looking for feedback. This is very minimal, barely engaged. The second step is consulting. So here it says communication flows to the community and then back, answer seeking. This is basically getting information or feedback from the community. So this time I'm sending out information, but I'm also looking for information in return. But it's a one-time thing. I don't want this to happen all the time. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do with the information that I take from you. So an example for this could be when we finish a semester, our teachers, the university sends out an end of the semester yearly feedback form, and then we give feedback on how the class was, how our teacher did, etc. However, they send us the information, we fill it out and give it back, but one, we don't know if they're going to use our feedback to adapt that class. Two, We never hear back from them. That is just answer or feedback seeking. That's consulting. When you consult someone, but you don't really involve them on what happens after you get that information from them. The third one, steps up, I would say this is the part where it's becoming more of an engaged process. So in Involve, it says communication flows both ways. Participatory form of communication involves more participation with community on issues, and we cooperate with each other as entities. So here, there's sort of a beginning of an established partnership. There's increased cooperation. Basically, we are no longer in the headspace of, I have something, I want your input, or I have something, here it is. That's outreach and consult. Here it is, I have something, what do you think of it? And then they provide more answer. And this is more of a involved situation, not a one-time thing like consult. This is going on at multiple times. You are involving them in the process of building your services or your program or your projects, rather than outreaching after you've done it or consulting once while you're doing it. This time you're involving your community partner in the project itself. And this is a flowing conversation. This happens multiple times. One step up from that is collaboration. So in Involve, there's no really difference in the structure of the partnership. You're still the top person doing the project, and the community is still just like a consulting person or like an expert, but they're not really in your project as equals. In Collaborate, communication flow is bidirectional. You're forming partnerships on each aspect of project, from developing it, making the agenda, making the process, to solution of the project. Here, there's partnership building and trust building happening. Here, the power structures are shifting. So now the community has almost as much a say as you. You are collaborating on all stages of the project, coalition, etc. So now everybody has a say. And then the last one, where the power structure completely flips over, is shared leadership. Final decision making is at community level. So even in Collaborate, who has the final say depends on how the project is being formed. Everybody can have a say, we all vote, let's say, but I have the final say, or the majority of the vote has final say, versus in shared leadership, the community has the final say. You as a person in the community have some sort of say, but your vote is not the final vote. You don't make the decision, the community makes the decision of whether to adopt your project or not, what direction the project should be taking. Here we are truly sharing leadership. An example could be, for shared leadership, coalitions or worker unions, where coalitions are sort of a gathering of multiple organizations around a similar outcome that they want to have. For instance, Rochester had an anti-lead coalition that was made up of healthcare professionals, educators, parents, etc., who wanted to prevent lead poisoning in children because of lack of policy around cleaning lead in the neighborhood or making sure lead doesn't get in the water. So all of these different organizations came together, pushed for policy change to prevent lead poisoning, and they all had final decision-making capabilities. They all made the decision together, and that was a shared leadership among a bunch of different organizations to push this policy. So that would be an example of shared leadership. So this continuum, the word continuum makes it sound like these are all steps you need to take to get to a community engaged, like the best community engaged shared leadership process. But I would actually argue not all engagement looks the same. You don't always have to start from outreach. You don't always have to finish at shared leadership. Sometimes you really need feedback. You're welcome to do the consulting step. You don't need to always build up and up. And this is upon the discretion and upon your personal values and how you want to engage with the community, what your project looks like, upon which criteria you're doing a project. Not everything can be a collaboration or shared leadership. Those are more vigorous forms of engagement, but it's also okay to leave things at outreach and consult if that's what you need from your engagement with the community. But it's important to consider these steps, consider the communities you're engaging with and the values you want to engage around to be able to get the best out of, the most meaning out of your engagement process. So I just want to remind that to everybody as we look at the documentary and the TED Talk and see how they're doing things differently and where it might fall on the spectrum. So this is from Elena and Bertha's presentation. from Principles of Community Engagement, where they talked about culture and community engagement. Since we have these viewings where people are engaging in different communities with different cultures, I wanted to read this beautiful quote again. So, culture is a complex integrated system of thought and behavior shared by members of a group, a system whose whole pattern allows us to understand the meanings that people attach to specific facts and observations. To understand the culture of a group is to understand their norms, their behaviors, their history, and these were some of the number 1 and 2 principles of community engagement, is to understand where people are coming from. In addition to that, we as individuals are cultural beings. We have our own identities, we have our own understandings of cultures, and it's important to understand where you're coming from into a community to see what differences in culture you have so that you can overcome those and not create conflict. These were some of the useful concepts for community engagement. I just want people to keep them in mind as we talked about the documentary and the TED Talk, and see if any of these played into what people were doing, especially capacity building and community empowerment. Those two, I think, are relevant to the documentary we see. Lastly, before we move forward with our conversation about the viewings, I wanted to introduce the 3 Ps of community engagement that I find to be personally very important and valuable to consider. And if you've ever taken an anthropology class, sociology class, you may have seen these words already. So I'll start with power. I was talking about the power structure when I was talking about the continuum. So power is the ability of an individual, group, or institution to influence other people and achieve their goals despite possible opposition or resistance. And a power structure is the way in which power is organized within a society. So power is basically how much influence an individual or a group may have over the other, who has more way in a situation, who gets their way, etc. And sometimes power structures can cause a lot of trouble, especially you're seeing a lot of stuff like authoritarian. Especially we see examples on stuff like authoritarian regimes. We see a lot of problems with police brutality, and all of those are examples of power structures going wrong. So it's important to consider how you might be perceived, what kind of power structure you're playing into, where you might come in within a power structure. So another thing that influences the situation is something called privilege. You might be more familiar with this concept. So privilege is something of value one group has that another group does not, simply by belonging to a group, either as an unearned advantage or an unearned entitlement. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term white privilege. It has come up a lot in the recent news. Basically, privilege is one group having more power than the other, or having access to more things than the other group or other individual simply by belonging to a different group. So in white privilege, by simply being white, people have more access to healthcare, access to better housing, etc., because of historical policies, experiences, perspectives, and perceptions of people. So privilege affects communities and power structures. And lastly, this one is important for us, especially, I believe, is positionality. It refers to one's social location and worldview, which influences how one might respond to power differentials in various contexts, as well as how one is perceived by others. So this is basically saying, in a community, what's your position? If you're doing community engagement, where do you fit in? It's understanding the context you're coming into, and it's understanding how you are positioned in a community. Are you opposing something? Are you with something? Are you perceived as higher in the power structure? Do you have any privileges? Or are you privileged in a way that would make others upset or make others see you in a different way? What's your personal life experience? What's the position? What are your values like that put you in your position in the community? So positionality is always important to consider, to understand where you're coming from and how you may be perceived by the community. And that shifts how you might do community engagement. So those are the 3 Ps. I find them very important, definitely something you should look into more. and we had an assignment, a handout explaining some of these concepts that I will link to the YouTube video as well. Lastly, this is from an optional reading, was not mandatory, but really good reading on how power, privilege, and positionality works in global service or development discourse, basically when international students or when students from academic institutions go into other countries to do service. How does power look like? I'm just going to read the questions because I feel like they're important to ask ourselves. So, what is power? Who has it? How does it operate? How does it flow? And what part of it is visible? And lastly, what part of the power structure is visible? And lastly, what part of the power structure is not visible to perceive and understand the situation that's going on? Now that we've covered all those terms, I'm going to stop talking here because I remembered to record the rest of the session. So you'll see the conversation we had in class, unpacking, first living on $1, and then unpacking art of asking. After that, we talked about our to-dos, which will come up on the next session, which were the mindsets of design thinking. So I'm going to stop right here, and I will connect to the rest of the video.
And I think that even if that wasn't why they were going, there may have been like some unintentional in the back of the mind where that may have been part of the reason that this idea came up. And again, they did a really good job of doing it and being respectful, and I don't think that was the intention behind it, and I think they came out of it with like really good information, and that it was overall a good thing that they did. But there is still like the romanticization of this like really poor rural area, and also like what you were saying, Lana, that even like in the US, like there are a lot of like poor people. Like it said in the documentary that in the area there were like 7 out of 10 families living under the poverty line, and I know that the qualifications they're using is different, I think, than in the US. But I looked it up. In Rochester, it's 33%, and the county I'm living in, which is Steuben County, which is a bit south of Rochester, it's 15%. And I know it's higher in the town that I live in because I'm in like really rural.
Yes, but some communities will have so little access to like infrastructure. Like say food, or like they cannot make even the healthy choices. For example, I know about the food desert. It happens even in Croatia. Like you have a limited access to like produce that is fresh, or to have you have limited access to like healthcare, or some social security benefits, just because you live in a certain community. And it is very thought-provoking, like you can be in the center of the world and actually be without the access to all the commodities that this actual community can afford or can provide. So you don't have to go far away to see how this inequality works.
Okay. I think that was a wonderful conversation, and I'm going to ask a question on top of that. I want to ask you all to think about, I want you all to think about how the power and positionality was represented within the documentary. Yes, they're talking about a lot of challenges and they're personally experiencing them. Yes, there could be a level of romanticization, but also there's an accurate portrayal of what's going on. My question is, these were two white American college students coming into this rural town, and it could have gone, like Grayson said, they were very respectful, but it could have gone much differently. So what were some of the things they did right that we appreciate in terms of acknowledging power and positionality, in terms of how they asked questions to people, how they engaged with people? What were some of the things you found to be best practices for community engaged purposes? Like, what did they did right that made you feel like they respected the community?
They made friends. That was
Definitely.
I mean, and also, you know, I thought that they were really I saw it, I feel like they were suspending they made friends and they could make friends because that's I mean like they were very very clear and you know and consistent in that's what they were there for. You know, they didn't come there to really enforce anything. They came there to learn. Well, I don't know, just they were like they made friends with that boy. They did interview people, you know, and pretty in-depth stuff. They accepted help from people, you know.
And I
So I,
think that
oh, sorry, what?
Go ahead, Lana.
I think that they changed the community. You know, there is a viewpoint that even when something extraordinary happens in a community, like encounter with some beast or I don't know anything, it changes the community and it like it brings community together. So I believe that's the greatest thing about this particular event was that they changed the community they were in just by being there and just by observing them. And it is like mirroring exercise because people in the community could mirror some of their behaviors and vice versa, and they could really benefit from this how can how they see us and how we see them. And it is like this I think immersion that is very like important because uh, it is the only way we can truly see where we can improve and what we can do to like be more like something that we want to emulate. Like for example, this little boy wanted to learn English or he wanted to learn Spanish or something. He had ambition. Maybe some of these people or these Americans gave him new ideas or perspectives or something like that. So it is really really important to know that nothing that happens in the community is outside of the community. It changes the community. So I think it's really important.
I think that was a really great point. And I wanted to highlight what Paige said, connecting it to the reading from last time. So these were the top, like the first three principles from Principle of Community Engagement. And Paige just said they were very clear about their purpose of engagement and with their efforts on what communities they wanted to engage with. They were knowledgeable about the community's culture, economic conditions, etc. They respectfully shared those in the documentary as well. And they, like what Lana was mentioning too, they went to the community, they established relationships, built trust, they worked with formal and informal leadership, and they sought commitments from community organizations and leaders and people in the community to create and mobilize new ideas. Like, I definitely agree, Lana, just from them being there and doing that long-term commitment to their relationship, just playing soccer with people, just teaching them little words of English, they did help them innovate and see like new ways of how to deal with things, but they were also very respectful and clear. Like that's one of the things, that's why I assigned this documentary too. So I agree with both of you, definitely. Let's see what else is here. I asked this, and these can go all together. You can respond to whichever. What leadership and community engagement skills do you observe in this documentary? Like what were some of the things that they did well? And then this or either you can also answer what values or mindsets, like we've been talking a lot about active listening, community engagement, you all presented on the readings, like what did the documentary remind you of? What did you see them doing well? Or the opposite, if there was anything that you found to be not the best practice.
They gave back to the community. They didn't take from the community, and I think that's the most valuable thing. Even when they made some games, they shared it with people in the community, and I think that's the most important part. For example, when they managed to grow radish, they share it. They made a dinner or share it with the community, and in that way they like gave the community like valuable insight into why they were there, not to take something, not to bring them down, but to build them up in a way. So
I I agree. I also want to add to that, like building. Um, I think the representation of the community in the documentary was pretty unique compared to what like most other documentaries or humanitarian cause like advertisements sometimes do. Like it was Eid in Turkey this past week, which is like the sacrificial holiday where people sacrifice lambs and then they share the meat with other fellow Muslims. And all of the advertisement is like, help your fellow sisters and brothers in need, people are in poverty, people are dying, etc. It's like pity kind of advertisement, versus in this documentary, not only do they show the bad sides, like the struggles people are having, but they're also showing how innovative and supportive the community already is. They talked about like Kiva and like micro loans that people were taking to start their own businesses. They talked about this like loan share. The community started to buy household furniture, like each month somebody takes the money from everybody, like in a group of 10, etc. Like they talked about all these innovative things people were already employing, that's showing that they weren't just people in need, but they were also people with agency, people who could change their own communities without somebody giving them the ideas. They just like needed capacity building in a sense. I liked that they represented the community in a way that wasn't just top down people in need, but also people who have agency, people who are already making change, people who are already employing innovative methods. And I thought that was unique to this documentary as well. Yeah, Matawan.
Two things I want to say really. One, teaching the, I think teaching Chino, the little boy, English was, I was kind of ambivalent about that, because on the one hand, you're allowing the kid to learn. On the other hand, it may kind of seem like indoctrination. Like if you're gonna teach something, at least be relevant to classes or something. But as long as this boy was willing to learn, then I'm okay with that. But and secondly, I wanted to bring up that I kind of hate how tourism culture is nowadays. Like they put, like when you visit another country, especially in a developing one, they kind of put you in an affluent suburb of the capital, or like a fancy hotel. They put you away from the reality of what's going on in the country. And I think, yeah, and I think if you really want to see a country, you kind of have to skip all those touristy sites and see it for yourself. Because I kind of felt the same when I studied abroad in Hong Kong, and this was when pro, and this was during the protests that occurred there. And since I usually stayed away from them, I was kind of frustrated that they were destroying all the subway stations and we had to go home early because there was really one big protest on the campus. So I felt really frustrated about that. But now, but I don't know. I just didn't have the courage to ask about it, or go to or go see what it's like.
I think that's a really like valid and like strong point that you made, that like tourism is definitely more of a hyper reality than the actual reality, and it's less about engaging and more about just enjoying yourself. And that's, again, like you can think of that in terms of privilege, what tourists have access in a country versus how like what the locals have access in a country. And that really like puts things in perspective. And like community engagement principles aren't just for classes or like community engaged projects or volunteering, etc. But I would also say like they also shaped how I see travel, how I see like how to contribute to local communities, etc. So that's a really great point you're making. Thank you.
Yes, and I also think in Croatia we are a tourist country, but not a lot of people in Croatia can afford to go to the seaside. On the continent, a lot of people live in like really humble situations, and they cannot afford it, like luxury retreats or 7 days at sea or in the mountains or anything like that. So it really is a problem, especially in developing countries where you have this like double reality of this like tourist meccas and like this on the other hand this like provinces that are like full of people who never even saw the sea, although they live in the same country. So I see what Mural was trying to say.
Thank you, Lana. Okay, I'm gonna move. Oh, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just really quick is I would kind of argue the opposite position is that if you start sending tourists to these other places, that puts a burden on the people who are already like really struggling, and like right now you have an issue with volunteerism where people who are going into those communities, like they're going in to like volunteer or whatever, but it ends up sometimes putting extra burden on these people because the good that these people are doing by helping often does not offset the amount of resources that they have to share to support the people that are helping, if that makes sense. So I'd kind of argue the opposite, that maybe it would educate the people who are visiting the country, but it's not that education is not worth the pressure that it would put on the people living in the country that already are struggling and don't have enough.
Perhaps a good exit ticket prompt for today could be to think about, like, rather than the two extremes of like volunteerism versus like regular like elite tourism, maybe let's think about some simple practices based on the principles and values of community engagement we've been talking about that we can employ next time we're visiting somewhere new. Like, what are some simple steps we can take to make sure we are being culturally responsible, that we are respecting and understanding the privilege structure that comes with being a tourist, etc. So that could be a good way to put that in the exit ticket, and I can share your thoughts in the next session when we're starting. Okay, I'm gonna move into Art of Asking, the TED Talk. This is going to be shorter because the video was shorter too. Amanda Palmer is a fabulous person. I thought her TED Talk was very interesting. So I want to start with talking about what approaches and methods does she mention or use in her life with her fans and fellow music lovers to curate the vibrant community that she has. Like, what are some events or things that she does that she mentioned that sort of help her sustain and grow her community? And if anybody who hasn't spoken yet wants to pitch in, that would be wonderful as well.
Good idea.
All right, someone was gonna go? Go ahead.
Okay. Trust. I found this was a huge similarity between the two things, and well, let's see. She did couch surfing, which the point of everything that she did was like kind of to lean into her fans, lean into her community, like rather than expressing things. It's just so different. I'm a musician. It was really, really interesting because usually in the type of music that I do, we just kind of, there's a ton of distance. There's not a relationship, although there is a community formed, and you do say thank you afterwards and stuff. But there was a much more personal element to all of what she did. And
yeah, like I would say trusts, you found the perfect word. I think she leans in. That's also a great word, by the way, leaning in. Like she leans in on her community and it's a very trustworthy relationship. And like she talks about how people criticize her and call her an imposter for asking for money from her fans, even though she distributes her music freely. But she also talks about how that's because they have a trusting relationship with each other, like her fans and her. So I think trust is a great word. And you mentioned couch surfing. I'll give the other one I remember her talking about is she undresses and lets people tattoo her with Sharpies as a way of connecting with her fans. So I would say that's like an extreme activity to show trust, but that's a bonding activity that she does. Any other values or things that she does you guys thought were valuable or insightful?
Reciprocity, like she gives something in return. She doesn't take everything, but she also gives something in return. For example, when she was playing this role of a statue, she was made sure that she made an eye contact or to make a connection with the other person, so meaningful connection, so that other person feel valued or on in a way respected for the thing they do for her. So I think that's a very important part of her deal, is that she is honest enough to really contribute back, like give something back.
I think that's a wonderful point, Lana. Like, it's not just about the music or the entertainment, but it's also about that human connection for her. Like she says, the most important part is that look that they share. So that's a great highlight. Thank you. Any other thing you liked in Art of Asking? Any one of you that you found valuable or surprising?
I as a musician, just giving away your music for free is really like I just want to bring out that that's really, really that's people spend time on that. They it sounds like she's writing it. They rehearse it. She said she practices. That's such a like it's like just to build on to what Lana said about reciprocity. It is reciprocal, and that is really strongly reciprocal too. To just like it's really powerful. That's all. Yeah.
I would really encourage you to check her out. Like her Patreon is huge, her crowdsourcing is huge. I don't listen to her music personally, that's not my type of music, but I love her personally. I follow her. She talks a lot about like she's a big advocate for human rights and like emotional, personal issues, etc. So definitely check her out if you are a fellow musician and you're interested. But she's really cool.
Yeah,
All right.
definitely. I will.
And these were some of we'll just talk very briefly. These were just general questions. Basically, the bigger question is, did you see any overlapping themes or values represented in either of these viewings that strongly resembled like the principles of engagement or any design thinking concepts we've talked about so far? Anything that's just sort of jumped at you from both of these things that were valuable? Okay, I'll answer the first
Like I
question.
said,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
in retrospect, after seeing this, I kind of feel regrets for not me for not engaging with Hong Kongers a little bit more. Like I just hung out with international students and visited all the touristy spots, and I kind of regret myself for doing that.
I think there is no regret, because this purpose of us having all of these conversations is to learn new things, discover new approaches and things we can do. So I would say reflect upon it, but don't regret it. We are all still growing. Like, we are always going to have these conversations going forward in our lives. So there will always be new things, and don't regret what's already happened. I was going to mention the first question. It was, how are the people in these videos becoming parts of communities? I found it in both aspects really impactful how humble and open to engagement they were. I think that was like one of my favorite things about the documentary makers is they're just so open and ready to learn new things. Like, they come in not as experts, which most documentarists or most humanitarians come in like thinking they know, or like even United Nations come in and implement these stuff. But these guys came in accepting that they were newcomers, that they were there to learn with a beginner's mindset, and they were ready to experience things that the community has experienced. So I thought that was incredibly powerful. Same goes for Amanda Palmer. Like, she's very open, trustworthy, and has built reciprocal relationships, like Lana said. And I thought those were very powerful concepts. There's a second documentary made by the same people. It's called Salam Neighbor. I'll put it in our Slack chat in case anybody is interested. That one made me cry. That one was incredibly powerful. It's about the refugee camps in Jordan. Okay. Do you have anything to say, Madhavan?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, for once we're about to finish on time, guys, so.
Yay!
So thank you. I hope that was useful and interesting. I loved hearing about what you thought about these documentaries. Thank you so much for participating. Even if you were just listening in, thank you. I hope that was interesting. I'm gonna talk about to-dos real fast, and then I'm gonna let everybody go. We have very small, multiple things to do. One of them is there's a handout. These are all in our Google Drive, but I'll also put them in Slack. This is a 4-page, it's like a list of definitions about privilege and oppression. Then there's a 2-page, another handout on design thinking mindsets. This is based on our actual homework. And then this is a YouTube video, it's 5 minutes. These are all very short, won't take you more than 5 minutes each. It's Mohammed Yunus. He's the founder of the microloan organization that they were talking about in the documentary. So watch the video, read the 2 very short handouts, and then this is the main activity. On Friday, we're going to do some presentations again, and it won't be as rushed. We're going to have smaller groups. So I have assigned you groups, and with your group, I want everyone to prepare a 5-minute activity on one of the design thinking mindsets. They're the ones that's showing right here. These activities can be anything ranging from a presentation similar to what you did the previous session, to a podcast style pitch, to a drama or theatric piece, to a game, to a mini workshop. Like, I want to encourage wild ideas, because design thinking mindsets are all about encouraging wild ideas, becoming empathetical. So just go wild. It doesn't have to be a presentation. It doesn't have to be just slides. It can be a game. It can be a drama piece, whatever you want. You'll have 5 minutes for the activity and 5 minutes to unpack it, like discussion. But if you want to do something super crazy, you can just have the 10 minutes planned out. I would encourage, one, please keep it at 10 minutes. I don't want to run over time, because I would hate to cut anybody, and I don't want to keep you here for longer than necessary. So these are the groups. Group 1 is Madawan, Habitamu, and Theo, and Laquanda. Group 2 is Paige, Bertha, and Yue. Group 3 is Grayson, Alicia, and Christina. And group 4 is Elena, Susan, and Lana. I gave you the mindset, so embrace ambiguity, make it, learn from failure, and creative confidence. I haven't put in all of them. I feel like we've covered some of them ourselves already. So this reading, the number 2 here that says the design thinking mindset handouts, they introduce all of the mindsets. So you'll have a starter point, and then you can go as crazy as you want with your 10-minute activity. And that's what we'll do Friday. We will do the mindsets, and then we'll sort of have a general conversation. Thank you. Everybody's free to go. Feel free to stick around if you have anything to add.